Hi, folks. I'm excited to moderate our first session of the day about socio-technical change for urine nutrient reclamation. And we'll just go ahead and jump right in. Our first presenters today are Aurélie Joveniaux and Fabien Esculier, and they'll be presenting on work they did in collaboration with Bernard de Gouvello. And the title of their presentation is The Project of Urine Diverting in the Saint-Vincent-de-Paul District, Presentation and Perspectives. Aurélie is a geographer and a researcher in the Lisieux Water Environment and Urban Systems Laboratory at the École de Ponce in France. She carries out work on the dynamics, brakes, and levers around innovative projects of source separation of human excreta. Fabien is a Ponce de Chaussée engineer. He coordinates the OCAPI Research and Action Program in Lisieux, École de Ponce, which aims at studying the contemporary mutations of nutrient flows and the management of human nutrient excretion. And Bernard is a researcher at the CSTB Scientific and Technical Center of the building and the Lisieux École de Ponce. He studies innovations in water and sanitation management in the building and their impacts at the urban scale. So take it away, Aurélie and Fabien.
Yes, thank you very much. So it's an honor for us to present our work from OCAPI Research and Action Program. It's an interdisciplinary research program on source separation that started already approximately at the same time as the Rich Earth Institute. And it's a pleasure for me to present the work that we did in our group, and especially led by Aurélie Joveniaux and Bernard de Gouvello. Aurélie is here with me today, and I'm going to present our work now. Source separation is enduring a recent growth of interest in France at the moment. It was a very common practice in the 19th century. It was broadly studied by many people in the OCAPI program, since urine and fecal matter were usually spread on agricultural soils. It disappeared in the 20th century, and there is a recent reemergence in France that can be notified by the emergence, for example, of the French EcoSan network, Réseau de l'assainissement écologique, RAE, in 2009. But initially located in rural areas and at individual scale. And since the middle of the 2010s, so quite recently, less than 10 years ago, there is an emergent dynamic in urban areas and collective buildings, and we have identified 20 projects of source separation at the moment. These projects emerge from the margins, that is not from the conventional urban planning. And an example is the first participative housing apartment building in France that we know about, and that is equipped with dry diverting toilet in the city of Grenoble. It's called Au Clair du Quartier. You see the picture of the urine separating toilet that was installed, and we had the surprise to discover when we went to see how it works that the urines are sent to the sewer, because for the people at that time, they were not aware really of the interest of collecting urine, and it's much simpler for them to collect feces and to compose them rather than collecting urine, which represents a much bigger volume. There are many other alternative sanitation systems that are developing in participative housing, so it seems as a very favorable niche in terms of development of source separation. And recently, there have been the first experimentations of urine diversion in conventional urban projects. And we're going to talk today about Saint-Vincent-de-Paul in the center of Paris, the 14th district, which is going on at the moment. Île-de-France, the region where Paris is located, is a pioneering and active territory about source separation, starting in the 2010s with tensions over sanitation. The river Seine is a small river compared to the size of the 10 million inhabitants of Paris agglomeration. And these tensions led to the emergence of an interest of source separation and the first academic research program on source separation in 2015, the OCAPI program. In the research and action that was made at that time, came with the interest of many different actors and led in 2018 to the first official institutional acknowledgement of the interest of source separation. And the local water agency, the Seine-Normandie Water Agency, voted in 2018 up to 80% subsidy on any project that would source separate urine and or fecal matter and valorize them in agriculture instead of sending them to the sewer. I think this is a very important step, maybe even worldwide, where in terms of institutional acknowledgement of the interest of source separation in France since 3 years now. Many different projects have been emerging in these recent years in Paris agglomeration, and the most remarkable one is Saint-Vincent-de-Paul project in Paris that was officially validated by the municipality in 2020, 1 year ago. It's the first French project of urine diverting at the scale of a district, and I believe it is the first world project of urine diversion in conventionally equipped with sewer city at the scale of 1,000 people. Indeed, this district is being built at the moment. In fact, it's a renewal of buildings that already existed, but they are completely reshaped. It's 600 dwellings with public and private facilities and shops, and urine diversion is intended to be done in the whole district. It has been validated in 2020 after a few years of maturation of the idea. The construction is underway at the moment, and it should enter into service in 2024. The chain of valorization of urine is the following. Interfaces should be flush diverting toilets with gray water and fecal matter and flush water going to the sewer, but 2 cubic meters of urine collected every day, with a mostly gravity network and a small part that should be a pressure network because of configuration. The treatment is a concentration process for the production of a urine-based fertilizer. And the valorization is as a fertilizer inside Paris by the city of Paris itself for use in Paris green spaces. From this, we have, Aurélie Joveniaux is a geographer, Bernard de Gouvello is a sociologist, and they have conducted a lot of different case studies, including Saint-Vincent-de-Paul. And we're going to share a few insights and issues from Saint-Vincent-de-Paul study and other Okapi case studies. First insight is the importance of the spatial restraint. It's a structural challenge in urban areas, since all different techniques and stakes of managing source separating urine and or fecal matter depend on the question of the density of the infrastructures that are available. The principle of reversibility is also very strong. We have seen in all the projects that are emerging and which we have studied a reversibility option for all of them, including Saint-Vincent-de-Paul, which facilitates a lot the fact that the actors are going to agree for this innovation. In Saint-Vincent-de-Paul district, there is a very strong involvement by public actors. I've talked already about the local water agency. The Okapi research program is public. And here the Paris municipality has been strongly supporting the project at the top level of the municipality, which is clearly something that enabled the ease of making it work. And of course, an issue of actors and alignment, something that takes time and must be renewed at each stage of the project, because each actor discovers the question and has to adapt to new configurations of actor. Our most important maybe result is that there is no best generic solution. And even if we could technically or economically or with an environmental analysis conclude that such configuration should we should put in place such or such technology to separate urine and how to concentrate it and so on. we see that the question of alignment of the actors is so important that the generic solution, the solutions that will be implemented, in fact, depend on this strong point, and solutions will be implemented if they correspond to the local actors' alignment. Our perspectives are identification of contexts that are conducive to source separation, and we see particularly participative housing, as I mentioned before, and eco-districts as places where they could emerge, as all the other margins of the city also. Internalization of the recycling process, as we have seen in Saint-Vincent-de-Paul district, is not possible in all cases. So for other projects, the question of the outlets is, of course, crucial for the feasibility and the durability of the projects. And at a wider scale, of course, we need a big evolution of regulatory and financing framework, and also cultural framework of the global nutrition excretion system, ranging from production, diets, and the management of urine and fecal matter. I am going to conclude with a share of biscuits that we unfortunately cannot share physically, but we produce bread and biscuits from our wheat-grown and urine-fertilized essay in agronomy, and I'm at least happy to share the picture of the biscuits that I'll be glad to share in the next physical summit. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Good reminder of some of the benefits of being together in person there. What an exciting project. We look forward to hearing what comes next out of that, and sort of the completion of that as well. So we'll move on to a presentation by Prithvi Simha about willingness among food consumers to recycle human urine as crop fertilizer, evidence from a multinational survey. Prithvi works as a researcher at the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences and as CTO of Sanitation 360.
Good morning, and thanks for inviting me to share my views on this topic. I think to start off, it's very important to appreciate the fact that there is a big difference between small-scale urine recycling, where we apply our own urine in our own gardens, and recycling urine within a neighborhood or a citywide scale. Because the bigger the scale, the more the actors and the messier the whole system looks like. But most people, including proponents of urine recycling, have often suggested that there is a big social barrier to recycling urine. And this barrier is going to be hard to overcome because our societies have norms and taboos on how we should manage human excreta, and that there is a big uncertainty on how end users are going to behave. Will they use new urine diverting toilets? Will they apply urine-based fertilizers on farms? And will they buy and consume food grown with recycled nutrients? So back in 2016, I began investigating this issue to understand if such actors would indeed be the hurdles to new sanitation technologies. I started by interviewing 120 farmers in southern India, where we found that even though recycling cow urine is common practice, farmers didn't really believe that human urine could be used as a fertilizer, but they were still willing to apply it. And this willingness increased quite a lot if they were supplied with dry or solid urine-based fertilizers rather than stored liquid urine. And following our own study, surveys in France and China have also indicated that farmers seem to have this similar preference for dry urine-based fertilizers. But I think what stood out in our study is the social stigma surrounding wastewater recycling, because the majority of the farmers did not like the idea that their friends or family applied human urine as a fertilizer, but they would support their neighbors to do the same practice. We then surveyed about 4,000 food consumers across 16 countries to understand their behavioral intentions to recycle urine. And we found that the willingness to consume food with human urine was relatively high. Of course, this varied between countries. consumers in China, France, and Uganda had high willingness, but less than 15% of the people in Jordan were willing to do the same practice. We also found that most people did not expect to pay less for urine fertilized food at supermarkets, which is good, but only a small minority were willing to pay a price premium, that is, more than what they would usually pay for food today. When we asked consumers what were appropriate ways to handle human urine, most people found using urine as a crop fertilizer to be more acceptable than using it to water gardens or lawns or to generate electricity. But the most widely accepted option was to send urine to a wastewater treatment plant, which suggests that most people have at least a basic level of trust in the concept of wastewater treatment, even though in many of our surveyed countries, the majority of the wastewater that is produced does not even reach a wastewater treatment plant. But thankfully, most people did not want to incinerate or landfill urine, though some people in Greece, Jordan, and Portugal thought it could be still an acceptable way to manage human urine. We wanted to try and explain why our surveyed consumers had positive or negative attitudes to urine recycling. We looked at 5 groups of explanatory factors. Now, for interpretation, just remember that the bigger the size of the dot, the larger is the strength of association of that factor on the overall attitude. We saw that cognitive factors, that is, people's perceptions of potential benefits and to a lesser extent, potential risks to recycling urine, as well as social norms, were the cross-cutting factors that featured strongly in shaping people's urine recycling intentions, and that these factors clearly mattered more than demographics, environmental outlooks, or what people thought human urine potentially contained. And here we're talking about pathogens and micropollutants like pharmaceutical residues or hormones, substances that are often cited as being the reason for the low acceptance of urine recycling systems. Now, overall, our studies, as well as those of other people earlier, clearly suggest that there is sufficient interest as well as willingness among end users to participate in new behaviors that the new sanitation systems based on urine recycling are going to demand. So we therefore think that the resistance to such new systems likely lies elsewhere, maybe further up the sanitation chain, because there are probably other actors with high power and high interest in maintaining the status quo, and we know very little about nudging such stakeholders with high decision-making power towards positive urine recycling behaviors. So I think future sociological research would do very well by focusing on such research questions. Now, based on our global survey, I think it's also very easy to simply conclude that people in countries like Jordan are conservative and that they would be unwilling to recycle urine. But we performed a follow-up study with 600 young people across Jordan with the hypothesis that there can be alternate ways to recycle urine even in such contexts. And our preliminary results indicate that yes, most people do not like the idea of being served urine fertilized food in cafeterias or using water safely extracted from urine for washing hands, but they would strongly support the installation of urine diverting toilets on the university campus, the use of urine-based fertilizers in green areas, as well as recycled water for flushing toilets. A common theme across all of our studies, including this ongoing study in Jordan, has been that there's quite a lot of social stigma attached to urine recycling. Now, while I can't answer why such taboos and stigmas exist, I think there is value in technology developers working side by side with sociologists and behavioral scientists to understand and unlock these aspects. Normally, I approach urine recycling from a very different perspective because I'm usually in the laboratory trying to treat human urine and to leverage urine chemistry in my favor. But my foray into socio-technical systems research has directly fed into the development of our group's technology. urine dehydration. Because, for instance, very early on, we realized that we would have to dry urine all the way and develop solid urine-based fertilizers, because farmers clearly seem to prefer dry fertilizers that they can spread with existing machines. Sociological research has also helped us identify what types of recycled products are more valued and therefore are more likely to be accepted in different communities. For instance, in Jordan, there is value in recovering water during urine dehydration, since the country suffers from water scarcity and people are positive to using recycled water for irrigating gardens and flushing toilets. So that's why I believe that more technology developers need to take part in sociological research, that too quite early on, because all of our technologies have a very strong social dimension that needs to be factored in to the design of the technology itself. Thank you.
Oh, sorry. Thank you so much. Such a good reminder that we have to include that social piece, or technologies aren't going to be adapted, obviously. Thank you for that. And next up we have, and sorry, just a reminder that Prithvi is here with us. So if you put questions in the chat for him, they will get there. And next up we have Hayley Smith presenting Social-Ecological-Systems framework to assess adaptive capacity for regenerative sanitation systems. Hayley is a PhD student in the Water Resources Lab at University of Georgia. Her research is on the ethics, education, and systems thinking of wastewater systems. Hayley is a director of the board of FLUSH, which stands for Public Hygiene Lets Us Stay Human. Hayley, are you able to share your screen?
Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be here this morning. I hope you're doing well. Let's get this screen going. Just to give a little bit of a background about me, is I got into urine diversion and toilet systems from a lot of my international travels, and that tends to be in eco-village and permaculture communities, and that has evolved into doing some different consultations. And so I like to kind of give you that frame of reference, and now I'm kind of moving that passion into more of an academic framework. So last year, I was exposed to these concepts of social ecological systems, and I thought this could really work for this community. So I'm excited to share it with you. And let's see if I can get to the next slide. Let's see. Can you hear my little, there we go. Okay, so a social ecological framework, for those who may not have been exposed, it's a systems way of thinking where you're looking at the social components and the ecological or environmental components and thinking about how they work together to produce systems. And being able to look at these components in a systems framework helps us identify strengths among relationships and power dynamics, and where feedback loops might be, limitations, barriers. And the way that you do that is by kind of organizing it all and then looking at where certain pressure points might be, or people or organizations that could really help move a system, and where those blocks are. So the idea is that you have an aim and a goal, and then you're able to assess a system, and it helps us to be able to put our energy and resources in a place to maximize that change. So a couple of the inspirational frameworks that I found is one that looks at what's called the adaptive domain. So and I don't want you to try to totally process these systems, but I want to give you a little bit of an example of, in systems framework, academia and research, people develop these systems to anticipate how things will change. The other one that I was really impressed with comes from an intergovernmental panel on biodiversity and ecosystem services. And it's a framework that's really trying to look at the human dimension and its interaction with nature and value systems. And so these are just to give you a sense of the organization of how these frameworks function. they're used all over the place. This is a bit of a short list of a literature review, because I imagine you can have this presentation and kind of dig into the research if you want. But relevant frameworks, they are for looking at how there's transformation in social structures, household decision-making, natural resource management, how people could work through particular dilemmas of like value systems when they come in conflict, perception of risk. And then the WASH sector is using frameworks, a bunch of different conceptual frameworks, some of which are social ecological, but they're mostly for developing countries, and they're looking at like whole system, not really focused specifically on toilet systems, and not for like the global north. So one system framework I found that is focused on toilets was recently published, and it's really about regenerative sanitation frameworks. And it does a great job for highlighting technologies, and it does bring in social components. But this framework, I wasn't quite satisfied with it because it doesn't allow you to understand the dynamics between the different components. And it didn't really acknowledge a lot of the social barriers that we know in this community we face when it comes to talking about human excrement and urine. So I kind of took all of these different frameworks and I thought about, we really have to have this environmental component, the social component, and the actual infrastructure. So that would be those innovative technologies as well. And what I ended up coming up with is this. So I'm just going to give you like a moment to look at this instead of talking. And I guess I want to point out, you can kind of notice now that on the left side, we've got this social domain. And one of the things I've done is specifically to add just toilet infrastructure. And I know that that's, in my mind, actually not just the actual toilet, but the system around it. And then on the far right, we've got the environmental domain, and also putting the toilet infrastructure there independently as well to see how that is functioning in the environment. And the idea is that both of these domains feed in to, as we understand the adaptive domain, and starting at the beginning, thinking about the potential, and then ideally moving down through where you have an adoption and an integration of that system. Ideally being able to then see how that integration would then feed back into a system so that we could see how things change. So to get a little more into each domain, we'll first look at the social domain of systems. So I have 4 main components, being in the middle-sized bubbles of adaptive capacity and policy and institutions, toilet infrastructure, and quality of life. And to the right of those, I have multiple examples of things that, from my experience and research and attending these conferences, is the things that would impact the, for instance, adaptive capacity of a person or a household or a community to shift into a regenerative sanitation system, such as a urine diversion system. Considering the policies and institutions, so that's going to be like the health codes, the financial structures, the different available resources in research and academia that would really influence the adaptive capacity for making a shift into really implementing a urine diversion system. And then also the actual toilet infrastructure, but looking at the social domain. So how do people understand them? What are their rituals and habits with their toilets that we need to consider? The maintenance that they expect to be able to handle. And then lastly, really thinking about like quality of life. So how these toilets would change an individual or community's quality of life. And some of the examples here are pulled from other frameworks. And if you were to really dive into them, you might want to look at some of the other frameworks that would inform how you would answer these questions. Next is the going into the ecological or environmental. We kind of can use that term synonymously in this field of work. I've got nature benefits. Some people might call this ecosystem services, but I liked the language of nature's benefits. But this is looking at how our infrastructure is interacting with the natural environment. And then moving on to the environmental conditions themselves. So really having a sense of like, what are the potentials and the limitations of the soil, the different properties, like how right now, what would the efficacy of the current system be, and how is that impacting the environment? And if you implemented a different system, how might that change? Trying to anticipate that. And then again, having a designated spot for that toilet infrastructure so that you can really assess and imagine how that infrastructure is going to be copacetic or not with the natural environment. And then thinking about land use. And land use, while it does have a social domain, it is typically in the environmental and ecological domain because of its impact on the actual land. So understanding the agricultural practices, things like the development density in an area, and then the community goals for land use. So these are some examples that you could almost imagine making like a worksheet or workbook on. So how we would potentially use this framework is a way, if you're starting off research, it would inform your data collection, possible like the strategies of like who would research what kind of information might you need to really look at the whole system approach. And then being able to organize that information as you were to bring in the different pieces of the puzzle, if you will, of the system. The advantages of having a systems framework is that it would give us a systematic way to determine potentially the viability of maybe one urine diversion system versus another. Having a framework would be a way to communicate to stakeholders about the complexities of these issues and to kind of work through the process. Would also allow us to assess the impact of adoption of a new system. And this would not be me, but there are some people in the systems framework and social ecological system framework community that really get nitty gritty and look at modeling these things and being able to, predict more accurately the success rates of certain technologies. And that would be very useful. So my offering in this moment is that it would be great if anyone wants to use this or to reach out for collaboration. I had written this as a proposal with the intention of doing some field work in El Salvador under this, and things hadn't worked out yet. So I haven't had a chance to actually implement this myself, but I would love to, and I hope to be able to come back in a couple of years with an update, letting you all know like what would work and what wouldn't. And I look forward to hearing feedback from you all as a community of would this serve our community well to have a framework that we're working with. So that's all for me. Thank you for listening. And I look forward to the rest of the panel.
Thank you so much, Hayley. It's great that we're constantly pushing that envelope of what's included in those frameworks as we learn more. And I'm excited that you're on that track. Next up, we have Tatiana Schreiber, Julia Cavicchi, and Shaina Opperman talking about integrative research, nested risks and responsibilities, and opportunities for co-learning about urine nutrient reclamation. Tatiana Julia and Shaina, and Rebecca Harden was part of this, but I don't think she's part of the presentation. They're all collaborators on social research into urine recycling as part of a multi-year NSF-funded project between the Rich Earth Institute and the University of Michigan. Tatiana is the social research director at Rich Earth Institute, with a particular focus on working with and learning from farmers about their interests and needs. Julia is a research associate at Rich Earth who supports our community engagement and education initiatives, including an annual home gardening program called Urine My Garden, highly recommended. Shaina is a research assistant with the University of Michigan School of Environment and Sustainability, who supports the NSF-funded research project and Michigan Sustainability Cases Initiative. Rebecca is a professor of anthropology at the University of Michigan and was co-principal investigator for the NSF grant. So I'm going to switch spots with Julia real quick, and I'll be back for question and answer time.
So as we collaborated on this, we're going to try to collaborate on presenting this. So we'll see how that goes. But we're going to try to present some of the highlights of the research the social research that we've done over the past 6 or 7 years. So we collaborated in 2016, Rich Earth collaborated with the University of Michigan and University at Buffalo on a project that included both technical work and social research. And Julie and I are currently the social research team at Rich Earth. Shane has worked with us on this team for 3 years, and Rebecca was co-PI on the collaborative project from the beginning. And I think one of us is going to put a paper that we wrote based on this research in the chat, so you can read more details about this. But out of this, and also our ongoing work documenting the ideas and experiences that we've had with Rich Earth's community-based urine collection program, several core research questions have emerged. So we started out with certain assumptions about people's interests or anxieties that many people have mentioned today, but we wanted to find out if we were right, and some of our assumptions actually turned out not to be quite right. For example, in terms of the potential discussed, one of the things, or yuck factor, as people often say, one of the things we discovered was that often people ascribe that concern to others that say they themselves feel comfortable with using urine-based fertilizers.
So some of the questions that have emerged as important include, how can we make these new systems responsible to both the hopes and anxieties that people have? How can we co-create urine recycling systems with different communities? What type of research do farmers need and want in order to consider using urine as a fertilizer? What collective responsibilities do these new practices entail? And how does urine reclamation change our different cultural, political, economic, and ecological relationships?
So this, which you don't need to read carefully here, but you can if you want to, but this was just a framework that we started out with that describes the process we use for our collaboration with the University of Michigan. First, we brainstormed who we needed to include and decided on a whole range of folks who are inevitably involved in such a profound transformation of how we deal with human so-called waste. We interviewed farmers, planners. We did interview some engineers as well, as has been mentioned, as important. People in the fertilizer industry, legislators, wastewater treatment plant operators, and we held several focus groups which were facilitated conversations with the general public and with farmers. And then we came up with common categories of thought or codes for further analysis, such as that idea of what we called ascribed attitudes that I mentioned before. And as we did this, we realized that we needed a more circular research model where we're constantly reflecting on what we learn and then sharing it back with the people that we talk to, and then rethinking our, to make sure that we got it right, and then rethinking our research plans and needs as we go forward. And so in this project, we didn't really do the sort of action research that we feel we need going forward, which would be to use the research to inform the development of both more research and education based on the participants' ideas and questions and concerns that will then lead to implementation of different kinds of systems in different settings emerging from the real needs and desires of people most involved.
So some recent struggles with scientific communication around COVID-19 have highlighted some issues with trust that have emerged as important in our research, notably distrust in externally produced knowledge and this desire for critical and collaborative research. So it's been really important for our team to develop trusting relationships at the outset, rather than risk causing future harm because community knowledge wasn't sought. And this can be done by not only making knowledge about the science, the technology, and the environmental factors publicly accessible, but by actively engaging people in the process of its development. So not just being transparent about what we know and what we don't know, but also inviting questions and critical conversations from perspectives that go beyond our own. And so, for example, participant perspectives have brought to our attention a wide range of risks and responsibilities associated with urine reclamation. This figure lists some examples within these different categories and domains that may also seem similar to some of the different things that Hayley mentioned in her presentation too. So that's really cool to see. So it lists some examples, but it also shows how participants communicated these risks and responsibilities as having a very deep context and occurring at different scales that interact and are embedded within each other. So for example, at the personal scale, people had questions about who benefits from urine fertilizer. Is it ethical to use human urine to make money? And does someone feel personally exploited? And these concerns were embedded within kind of larger scale concerns at the international global level about human rights in agriculture and commodifying human bodily effluents, and whether it supports local self-reliance, including through nutrient cycling. And on one level, this seems really daunting to have so many entangled scales of where risk lives and uncertainties about the effects of technological change. But at the same time, this model is hopeful because it reminds us that intervention on one scale, even the smallest one, affects understandings of risk at all of the other levels.
So just for some examples of kinds of things that people said that illustrate some of these things. For example, one person in one of our focus groups said, something I'm really not okay with is this system being used to make a profit for people to get really rich? That to me is just ethically wrong. It just rubs me the wrong way. I think it's ethically wrong to make money off of it because it's from humans. And another person said, if it could become an industry that sort of weaves itself into the community in some way, then that also seems incredible and positive. If you're collecting local urine from local people, then there's going to be some level of cross accountability. So while these issues of trust and accountability came across as crucial among those we interviewed and in our focus groups, we also saw a lot of support and interest in urine recycling and enthusiasm and ideas that were generated about how to go about this type of social change.
So as shown in this figure, which parallels the previous one, people also had a lot of ideas about how to implement urine recycling and research at different scales. And so this input really helped us identify the types of dialogue groups, which we'll discuss a little bit more a little bit later, that would be helpful for people with these different knowledges to discuss the potential risks that were identified and how to address gaps in knowledge between planners, wastewater treatment operators, farmers, regulators, et cetera. And we know that there's a lot of detail to these slides, and we'll make this available later. And also these diagrams are in the nested risks paper that I put in the chat.
So these are just a few sort of quotations that illustrate some of the ideas that different people had about how social change and other kinds of change around urine recycling might happen. So one focus group participant said, it'll start small. It might make more sense to start on a home garden size than the big, but I would also target both. Another participant said, we can create the things that allow us to sustain our communities, the fertilizers to feed the food that feeds the people. If we can do that locally, then we're a lot more resilient as a community. a Vermont planner we interviewed, or the research team interviewed as well, it said, I think that seeing the technology used well in public spaces helps people kind of become more receptive to it. And along those lines, another participant said, a good start for getting the public on board with this is to just put, referring to urine diverting toilets, in a very well-used restrooms, just so that people can start seeing them, can see them. So some of these quotes illustrate how different ways to kind of take these ideas from this research into practice. And so we're working on bringing these ideas and suggestions from participants into practice through an approach of learning with people, or co-learning. And so some methods for doing this include more traditional methods like interviews, dialogue groups, and participant observation, also creating and using virtual learning tools in the classroom, and also different kinds of experiential workshops and site-based learning and toilet-based learning. So learning by doing and learning by going. And so along with doing these different things, using different language and narrative framing tailored to different audiences and contexts is really important. And so one kind of small example of this is how different people explained to us that they were comfortable with different names for this practice, and their reasoning behind that, and why they felt these different names were important and different ways of talking about it. So like whether you use urine diversion or source separation, or urine reclamation, or urine recycling, or pee cycling, people had all sorts of different thoughts about what to call it. And then also for urine fertilizer itself, including ideas like ultra-urea, biofertilizer, reused urine, or of course, liquid gold.
All right, so I just also wanted to emphasize this idea about dialogue groups, since we've talked about that before yesterday. This came up quite a bit, but so interviews are, common to ethnographic research and really help ensure rich thinking. And I'm a big proponent of interviews, so I think we'll keep doing interviews. But instead of the more traditional focus groups, which aim to solicit specific information, we're kind of advocating, dialogue groups or facilitated conversation across differences. It can be either within, similar communities, or it can be across differences. So figuring out like who should get in the same room is really important. And as we do these kinds of dialogue groups, co-designing the conversation guides, the facilitation guide that you will use with some of these with key people from these groups could be a way to ensure that the most meaningful ideas really get airtime, co-facilitating the guides and also co-facilitating the sessions themselves.
Based on some experience installing a few urine diverting toilets on the University of Michigan engineering campus, the research team developed a case study for use in college classrooms as another one of these co-learning methods. And the case leads students through a simulation of the planning process, where students are tasked with trying to convince the administration of their assigned role's position, either for or against installation of urine diverting toilets in dorm buildings. Rebecca Harden first implemented the case in her graduate seminar, Frontiers in Environmental Justice. And of course, this community of learners is largely one of self-selected people who feel personally committed to environmental action. However, they noted that the case helped them more concretely conceptualize commitments to sustainability at a community scale. So for example, in a post-survey, one student wrote, "I had not considered the ways in which infrastructure, especially bathroom infrastructure, could play a role in enhancing ecosystems as well as ecosystem services. This case was really fascinating to me, and I plan on sharing this case with many others. I love that these toilets are upcoming and exist at the University of Michigan, and I'm really eager to see where else these toilets will be built." And so case studies and virtual learning tools like this are really well suited to connecting classroom learners with kind of wider learning communities that are involved in this process of public innovation and transformation. And so the students' reflections on both the case and the technical and social aspects of systems change continue to inform our research, generating knowledge that can eventually be brought back into the classroom through richer learning tools and so on.
So then the third kind of opportunity for learning with different kinds of participants is this approach of experiential learning, which can take lots of different forms, including, as has been mentioned earlier, actually engaging with people through toilet fixtures and portable toilets as a place to learn from participants about what they think about this kind of system. Another opportunity for experiential learning is home gardening education programs, which can be a really interesting way of teaching people to use urine fertilizer in their own backyards as sort of a starting point to also think about some of these bigger infrastructural and social changes that come along with reclaiming a waste as a resource.
Yeah, and are you done? Were you finished, Julia?
Yeah, go ahead.
So another thing that we're trying to do at Rich Earth is doing research, with farmers, partnering with farmers. And we'll be talking more about this particular project that's illustrated here tomorrow. But this was a project that we did trialing urine on different crops. And one of them was hemp. And so what you see in the background in these two photos is the wonderful hemp crop. And farmer to farmer knowledge exchange can happen with these kind of site-based demonstration projects. And going forward, we hope to include facilitated breakout groups at such events to enable participants more direct exchange of ideas and recommendations for future research. And going forward, we anticipate carrying out our research with this type of participatory action research model, which again may be hard to read in this particular graphic that we did, but you can see it later on the slides. But the idea is that we plan projects that emerge from our prior collaborative research. Then we engage in the research itself. Then we observe what actually happens and develops on the ground. And then we communicate our findings back to participants, and then the cycle starts all over again.
And so on that note, in addition to kind of co-designing the future of the research, using this process to have education and implementation strategies based on participants' ideas is really key. So it kind of continues this cycle in all aspects of the work that we're doing is the goal. So thank you, and we look forward to your questions in the discussion section.
Thanks, team. It's so easy to get sort of in our little urine excitement bubble. It's good to have some voices from people who are not yet in our bubble to remind us. So we have a few minutes for questions. I know there was a sort of a flurry of exciting conversation happening in the chat. So I think a lot of questions were already answered in the chat. So if I present one to a speaker and you feel like you fully answered it, you can go ahead and say that. But if you want to add to anything that you either put in the chat or didn't have time to, this would be a great moment. So first for Tatiana, your interviewee's concerns about corporations, big phosphorus, making money from their excreta, echo conflicts about profit making from DNA, Henrietta Lacks cells, or developing world products like neem oil. If urine is harvested more easily from some groups and used to benefit other groups, conflict may ensue. Great question. Go ahead, Tatiana.
Yeah, I don't think it's so much a question as a comment, and that's really true. I mean, that's what we heard from some of our interviewees. Not all the people we talked to thought of this right away, but there were a few people that immediately came to their mind. I don't know if anyone else in our group wants to respond to that. But yeah, so people are concerned about it. So, having to figure out ways to ensure people, as we sort of laughed when we heard this, because we didn't really think anyone was going to make a lot of money right away with this. But but it definitely came up because it's something taken from our human bodies, and how is it going to be used? And people's worried about sort of the commodification of their bodily secretions.
Awesome, thank you. There's a question for the Aurélie and Fabien crew. Who regulates the treatment process? We are struggling to find a pathway for this in Massachusetts. If you're still there.
I'm not sure to understand the question. If the regulation is about the right to sell a product that comes from a urine treatment, then today regulations are from the Ministry of Agriculture. There's a possibility to ask for, in Europe, for the validation of a urine concentrated fertilizer, but no one has done it yet in France for urine concentrated products. And the only product that is seeking validation is 2P Organics that got presented yesterday, but with cultivation of bacteria on urine.
Thank you. And I'll have one more for you before we move on. Can you tell us more about your dialogue with the city of Paris and how they were convinced on the use of urine for green spaces?
I think it's a question of mafia. I'm an engineer. I belong to the water mafia of Paris. I am a high-level civil servant. So I've been working in this mafia between 2007 and 2013. And I think I'm the first person of this mafia who says it's serious. We can really divert urine and make something with it. And I think it managed to raise the, I mean, I'm not the only person to do it, but for the case of the city of Paris, I think there really was a shift from militancy and people from the EcoSan network in France saying we need to shift to dry toilets and so on. But at the same time, this was not thought at the scale of a city. It was more for rural areas. And in OKP program, we decided to study seriously the question with the question of the scales of the cultural changes of the social actors of agronomy and so on. And the city of Paris embarked with relative confidence in the fact that it was interesting, because I also think that now people are aware that we are at a level of unsustainability that is so high that we can think of change everything. And this is possible now, which was not possible a decade ago, I think, in France. So yeah, the key actors afterwards, I would say, were elected people in Paris who were powerful enough to push for urine diversion, even though there was a lot of barriers and a lot of difficulties to address. And I think it's quite miraculous that it went on, and it's still not in. It's still not working. So of course we will meet in 3 years, and I will either cry or be happy, depending on how this works out in the end. But because the alignment is not finished, there are still a lot of barriers before this can work.
So we'll bring tissues and cookies for either case, or for both. Thank you for that. A question for Prithvi. Did you show Jordan sample were reluctant to hand wash with clean water separated from urine? Wouldn't Muslim hygiene culture affect these attitudes? So can you speak a little bit about the cultural, what you see as the cultural implications?
Yeah. So when I actually visited Jordan a few years ago, and I have had many sessions with religious experts from the community. And when we designed our survey, we did factor this into the...
Oh no, Prithvi, you seem to have frozen. If you thaw, oh, there you are.
Here again.
Yes.
That's why I sent my presentation before. So in Islam, water is classified into 3 different parts, like pure water, water that can be treated, and water that should not be touched. So we asked our survey participants what they would classify urine as, and only 30% of the respondents actually selected urine as an untouchable water. So if we look at that, I mean, yes, there is a religious dimension to urine recycling in Jordan, but it's probably not such a big factor as we think it is. And I just wanted to add my view on like Fabien's comment. It's that we have this session on, public acceptance about urine recycling. But I mean, it was not as though 2 million people in Paris took to the streets and said, we want urine diversion. It was few key actors, and Fabien and his mafia who was, responsible for bringing that change happen. And I have never seen any study that shows, there will be only 5% acceptance of this idea. Most studies always say there is at least 30 to 40% of any survey that we do, that there is interest and there is willingness. And then if we go back to what Lynn said yesterday, if you look at the theory of diffusion of innovations, we're quite far ahead on the curve. And we are talking about a technology that's not even mature enough to be applied at a citywide scale. And still there is interest. So why are we so worried about public acceptance of something that we haven't actually implemented yet? So to technology developers, I would say, continue working on your technologies, but factor the social dimension into your technology, because you want your technology to be accepted in the end. But I don't think we should worry so much as we do.
Thank you for that. Hear, hear. One more question for Fabien and crew. The history of source separation in France is fascinating. How can we learn more about this? Do you have extra resources for us?
Yeah, answered in the chat. Most of our research is in French. So French readers will love read hundreds and hundreds of pages about history of source separation in France. And readers of English will have less pages, but still there are some things in Okapi website. I put the link of one article in the chat. And you can see also Okapi English page. I will put in the chat.
So it sounds like the first resource we need is how to study our French, on our French language there. Thank you for that.